Hello and welcome to another Great Shouts Marketing and Growth Interviews. I'm Ed Davidson. I'm a fractional head of marketing and a host for these sessions. This series is all about how startups move to that scale-up phase of growth. And we hope that it's really useful and interesting for CEOs and founders of companies that are thinking about going to that next stage. These are warts and all interviews with great agency owners, founders, and marketeers who've got great kind of understanding and background. And today we've got Mags. Hey there, Mags. Good to see you.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Great to have you on. So, Mags, do you want to give a little bit of an introduction to who you are and what you do, and then we'll crack on with the questions.
Perfect. So I'm Mags and I run a boutique retention agency. We help e-commerce and D2C businesses win more customers, keep them longer, and keep them happy. So that's an important element. And we've been around for 5 years, and both myself and my co-founder Olga, we come from a startup scale-up D2C background. So we've been on the other side of the fence, which I think gives us that additional perspective of what it's really like to build a startup and scale it and then do things with it. So yes.
Super interesting. Great stuff. Well, the first question that I normally ask is to kind of have a bit of a grounding. How do you define when a startup moves to that kind of scale-up phase?
So that's a very good question, because obviously that's not a very sort of well-defined line. For me personally, it's all about that moment when the team feels the need for documenting and embedding processes across functions. So for me, startups is very much about trying things and finding ways of doing things, both in terms of acquisition and finding customers, defining those customers, but also operations, right? So it's like, how do we actually deliver what we sell? And then when there's when this need comes for documenting things that the team understands that this works and it doesn't, and now we're ready to actually hand over things that work to somebody else and get on with things that we now want to move on to. That for me is a sign, okay, that becomes more of a organized organism, so to speak. And for me, this is something, because the things when we know they work, that means that we can build on them. And this is the moment for me that is a moment we can tell that this is a scale up. They're actually scaling, building on things they've already built.
And that, yeah, it's a great point in terms of that building those kind of processes. How do you stop things from slowing down in that way? Because obviously you kind of want to continue the growth. You want things to compound. You don't want to put obstacles in place, but you want to make sure that there's those processes. How have you seen that kind of working?
I don't think anybody has a really great answer to this. I think every time the teams I was involved in, both brand side and now from the agency perspective, every time teams want to do both continuously, I think it's a stretch. It's tricky. I think that sometimes just taking things slower and really focusing on building these processes, defining them, just so you can scale a minute later, half a minute later, but really taking a breather and investing in building processes, building that foundation to scale further is really important. I don't think that doing it all simultaneously is really possible. Haven't seen it just yet. Maybe I'm a naysayer here, but I haven't seen it this way.
Okay, yeah, and it's certainly very tough to do.
Yeah.
Look, often we have guests on here that kind of have focus around kind of acquisition and kind of channels like that. Super interesting to have you on in terms of your kind of focus on retention. Can you give me, I suppose, in the kind of overarching view, how that retention play really works for you, especially when that kind of startup moves to the scale up phase? I think where it's really interesting as well, I think, especially if it's SaaS or, you need to bring on customers and then there's a level of churn that goes with it. And there's often, really interesting element of, well, we need to keep the eye on the ball of bringing new customers in, but if we have a high the churn rate, then that's a problem as well. So it'd be really interesting to have your view on retention.
Perfect. So, so I think that retention has been neglected for a very long time in many startups. It's for a long time it was all about growth, and kind of that churn's been sort of swept under the carpet in very many ways. And then the focus on retention was very much about re-engagement, win back, and sort of quite aggressive tactics to bring those customers back in. And so the natural sort of conflicts with, like, do we offer the new customers deals to somebody who's cancelled? How do we get them back in? All of these natural conflicts sort of showed up. And that, to me, is a sign of, when that happens, is a sign that it's all very much transactional. And I think that retention is becoming very much about the experience. And what we tell our clients is that retention in today's marketing is not about retaining customers, paying customers, but it's about retaining communities. So it's more about retaining an active community of people who see value in what you do, and it's very much connected to content we share. It's about how we do our marketing, and if that marketing provides value, then we know that even if somebody cancels or stops buying, there's that likelihood for them to either come back again when they're ready, but there's also proof of them recommending your brand to their friends, family, God knows who, right? But it's very much, in my opinion, nowadays is very much about retaining your community and retaining reach within that community. So it's not just about followers, it's about how many of them you reach on a regular basis, how many of them actually engage with you. The same on email, same on SMS, same on WhatsApp. What's the size of your community? How often do they actually engage with you as a brand? How much of what you talk about resonates with them? And selling happens almost as a byproduct. And I feel that what I said at the very beginning, that retention was very transactional. It was all about, oh, we're going to give you a discount if you come back, and then they turn again, because that relationship becomes very much about what deal they can get. Whereas if you move the dial to what value you provide, what you talk about, what you stand for, what you're building, the startup scale up you're building, actually complements somebody's image about themselves and why they want to be part of what you're building, this becomes much more long lasting, much more important on an emotional level. And I think this is where we should focus retention on. And that selling element becomes much easier. So
yeah, and I think that the word certainly is that kind of value add that you're providing outside of just being kind of transactional. And the more that you can help people's problems that make them feel that they're part of something rather than just a transaction with your product or service, then the more kind of affinity you have and the more kind of experience that you can deliver. And then obviously shouting about it to other people, that thing. So can you give me, I suppose, a few examples of them, even clients that you've worked with, about how you've instilled that? And obviously, presumably, if you guys focus on e-com and D2C, then that's probably a really interesting examples as well.
So I think a good example is we work with one of the fastest growing bespoke kitchen manufacturer in the UK, and they're quite premium. And for them, the decision is being made by a customer sometimes in 3 months, sometimes in 6, sometimes in 24. So that customer journey is very long. And this is a sort of an extreme example, but a good one for people to sort of illustrate it, what retention is really about. So in this case, it's about retaining that community, retaining an email list, an SMS list, and retaining them active, engaged, and interested in the brand. Because if you think about it, when you're thinking about buying a kitchen and you want to spend, double digits on, something that's going to be with you for years, you're not going to make that decision like this. And you have, lots of different things. Sometimes you might have brochures here, you might have some Pinterest things, you might have some scrapbooks online, offline, and that decision, you discuss it with your partner. And the ability for a brand to stay front of mind throughout this process, that's where that skill set comes in, to be able to provide enough value and engagement for people to keep wanting to open your emails, go to your blog, engage with your with other touch points. Because this is when people, when they're very transactional, they actually lose, because how many times can you just send an email saying buy my kitchen?
Yeah.
If you're thinking about 24 months worth of dialogue on email, SMS, and all of these touch points, you really need to think about what your customer needs, what they might enjoy, what they might find helpful. Think about stages of their consideration process. And so this is an interesting case, because this talks about retention even before somebody becomes a customer. And this is why, right, because we're talking about that prospect, that lead, an email subscriber, an SMS subscriber, and how do we keep them engaged all the way through to that moment where they place an order. And when they place an order, it's so much easier to keep, because they're already happy and they're an ambassador naturally, because they've got that kitchen. So it's like, my kitchen's the best. So it's far easier to get them to engage with that content afterwards. But before that, you're competing with a lot of people who are trying to do the same thing. So how do you stay front of mind? How do you stay exactly where they are engaging with content around it, on and offline? So I think that's a good example of this sort of retaining community, retaining that database more than a customer as such.
And look, it's a really kind of interesting definition, as you kind of say. A community could be, a community instead of the business is potentially that email list, right? It's the value that's in that email list. And if you have, which is very easy, the situation, if you send out lots of emails that have low levels of value, then not only will they not reach the customers, but, they'll go into that promotional folder of doom and never kind of be looked at. So it's providing that value, as you were saying, in those kind of discovery stages, or helping them to see the kitchen in context, or what else is going on in their life, to engage them to become a customer. In terms of the actual definition of a community, a LinkedIn group or a Facebook group or something like that, do you find that that's possible with brands, or is there a danger that if you start trying to create that community, that it can be like a tumbleweed situation when there's nobody really engaging? Good to see where there's a sweet spot there.
I think it comes down to the natural capacity of a brand to facilitate conversations in these. If there's that skill set in-house, definitely it's worth doing. But if there isn't, if nobody really knows how to do this, then probably best not to touch it, because as you say, it's sort of a cemetery of sad posts. It's where the social media managers' posts go to die. So I'd say that that's one of the most risky things to probably try and do without good experience and expertise. I think probably it's far safer to start with things like WhatsApp communities, and it puts sort of, we come back to the definition. I don't want to be too academic about it. What's the difference between a database and a community, right? And I think we shouldn't probably get hung up too much about it, but I think at the heart of the community is a dialogue, right? So even on email, you can create a community as long as you try and engage that with that audience in a way. And it doesn't have to be getting them to chat to each other. It can be as simple as asking them questions and then sharing what you heard. And that's enough of a dialogue. And, people expect for email to be a different medium to a WhatsApp or a Facebook group or a LinkedIn group or whatever it might be. But I think that it all comes down to, like with any other channel, really, if you're going to do something, ensure you can do it well, because if it's a cemetery of posts, then
you've got to have that engagement, otherwise it's just shouting into the abyss. Yeah, certainly.
yeah.
I suppose what's really interesting, and outside of a community or a conversation directly with customers, even that kind of UGC thing, I suppose I'm always interested in the level of kind of permission marketing, but also that interruption of the medium. So you kind of expect to potentially have emails. You might not engage with all of them, but they're useful and valuable, and you look at them, so you keep receiving them. All the way to like a phone call, which is like really interruptive, and it's like jolting me from my day, and I don't know if it's my family or something wrong, right? Is that permission that you have with the customer to be able to do that? I suppose in ways I've kind of seen it, again, maybe using SMS, for example, right, and to hear your side of it. If you send an SMS, which is a reminder that you need to attend an event, maybe you've got the permission to do that. If you send an SMS that says we've got 5% off our offer today, that's not for permission. So it'd be interesting to know where you think that kind of boundary lies.
That's a very hot topic. I hear a lot of these questions, and the thing is we all, as humans and as customers, we all have different preferences. So it wasn't so long ago when a lot of D2C brands that we worked with, so mission-driven brands, would not want to engage in any SMS marketing because they thought it was too intrusive. So it was too, like, SMSs is this for, private comms and, where's my parcel kind of thing. We don't want to get in that space. But now what we see is like great brands do it very well. And as long as the customer signing up to SMS knows what's coming and gives a fully conscious consent to get these messages, then I guess that's fine. And we all have preferences how we want to hear about promotions and marketing. And for some people, there are people who don't like to be emailed stuff, promotion stuff, because there's far too much of it, and they'd much rather hear from a brand over SMS or a WhatsApp, or it's the same with push, really. There are people who love website push or app push notifications, and there are some who hate it. And I think this is actually the how retention game is changing, because retention is all about consent and it's all about preferences, and the ability to capture those preferences and that consent in a way that the customer is actually first of all willing to give it to us, willing to communicate how they want to be spoken to, where they want to be spoken to, when they want to be spoken to, how often, and so on and so forth. This is where the magic lies. So we've got that content strategy at the sort of heart of it, and then we've got all of these touch points that should be used according to customer preferences, so that we build on that relationship and the longevity, and we retain that community, rather than try and use these things in a way that, oh, SMS sells, let's just blast. That's not going to work for a long time, right? So we identify people who are happy to hear over SMS, over WhatsApp, over push, over direct mail, all of these channels, and then we talk to them the way they want to be spoken to.
Yeah, and I think if you do that, and you can, it's either obviously in terms of permission, but it's also being able to kind of see the level of engagement in terms of metrics with those communications to see if these things are landing, or if they're getting really low engagement because they're too much of the sales end. And it's classic kind of 80-20, like it always is, but getting that balance right. I think what's interesting, your perspective around this whole concept of community, which I think is a really interesting angle, is that people, at least kind of what I see, want to follow people, right? Or want to engage with people. They maybe don't want to engage with the brand. Again, using the example of LinkedIn, a lot of my clients engage with individuals, they engage with founders, but not engage with the company. Where do you see that fitting with community for your perspective, especially around like e-com and D2C, when there's these companies rather than potentially individuals?
Great question. And we very much encourage, especially startups and scale-ups, because that's our niche. And this is often where that persona of a founder is present. And I think that just like in B2B, that pressure for founders to be visible and to build their own personal brands is definitely there. It's not the times that we want to support startups that have, you know, beautiful branding, but we don't know who's behind it, right? So with regards to all of the channels that we help brands build retention on, so email, SMS, WhatsApp, all of these, we encourage for there to be a mix of content shared and those messages from the founder. So really spoken in that sort of very organic, authentic way. So on email, it could take a form of like a plain text email, just to sort of show that this is actually the founder talking. Again, on SMS, it could be lovely as long as it's not overused. Because obviously, if it comes too often, then there's always a question of, is it really him, her, or is it his team, right? And this is when it loses power. So can be a wonderful booster of that emotional element of brand building, loyalty building. And I think it's a tool that should be used, but should be used authentically and wisely.
And that, I completely agree with that. Sometimes it can ring hollow if it's also if the tone isn't quite right and it doesn't kind of follow through if people are kind of ghostwriting, things like that. So I think it's important to get that right. Yeah, agreed. Where do you see kind of user-generated content sitting in kind of all of this? So again, people maybe follow people. If they see their peers engaging or part of that, then maybe they're more likely to follow and engage rather than just the business talking at people. So do you see the power of that?
Absolutely. And wherever there's an opportunity to use any sort of, obviously influencer content is super powerful, just to give additional weight to any USP of a brand. But just peers, just people from the community sharing their experiences with the products, with services, is a super powerful thing to do. It's getting sometimes difficult to get it from people because it's, and brands do it on a very transactional sort of level. It's very difficult to engage people in this way, but there are brands who do it very well. Can't remember the name of the fashion brand that does a sort of a monthly magazine style content sort of release, where they share articles about people that buy their products, their clothes, and these are sort of women that follow a specific profile. They're not influencers. They're not huge sort of media personas, but they share the values that the brand shares, and that I found very, very powerful, because it sort of gives me me as a customer an opportunity to learn something about the other customers that are within the same group that I am, and it sort of helps me understand what this brand does that sort of makes people love it. So I thought that was a good example of it. It's pretty hard to execute it well. It's not a quick thing, so there's a whole level of strategizing about how to do it to execute it well, but it's definitely worth it. It adds that additional emotional level to all the comms.
I suppose in terms of that context of startup moving to scale up, is there a time and a place for this different these different elements of kind of community building? I kind of think often with, say, a startup, you've got those early adopters, right? And those early adopters are potentially going to be huge advocates and very passionate about the product, and maybe you can kind of utilize them in some way. Is it classic Venn diagram? If you start moving kind of wider around that, how do you engage different people that maybe answer a kind of slightly wider context of what your product offers? But yeah, have you seen those kind of stages where different tactics come into place?
I would say that when in that startup phase, it's super important to nurture these early adopters. And again, coming back to this sort of founder comms, obviously depending on the price point and the size, but the more the founder can authentically engage with those early adopters and understand who they are, then it's easier to widen that net, because then out of these early adopters, there comes inspiration who might be the next sort of role model or ideal customer persona to sort of leverage further to expand into the next customer group. I think what's important in all this is to ensure that while we're using user-generated content and we're expanding these customer audiences, for those people that we sort of base it upon, is for them to be slightly aspirational to who we're actually targeting, because this is when they, people go like, this is when that, again, we're leveraging the power of that early adopter, right? So people go like, oh, I like who they are, what they do, so I want to be like that, and this is when we get access to many more followers.
And I'm having conversations the last couple of days on this. It's really interesting around that, that you're solving a customer pain point with what you offer, with clear kind of benefits. But I do think there is also an element of kind of aspiration or inspiration that you sprinkle on it to be able to actually get that pull or that FOMO to get people to take that kind of action. So it isn't just, answer that particular problem because it feels quite dry in that way. Yeah, fascinating. I suppose that we're running out of time here, but the kind of last kind of question as well is around how do you think that when that founder moves on and starts really scaling, that you move away from that founder-led growth? When do you think that is best applied? Because I sometimes think that there's grounding to it, but then potentially it could be a limiter if you start kind of scaling up.
Oh, that's another ever-present debate, isn't it? I think that I would probably try and answer it not from the customer perspective, but from the founder perspective. So I guess the first question to ask is what's the founder's exit strategy? Because if this business is something they want to keep for long and this is their lifestyle, then I guess just have them in everything for as long as possible, because they're usually the that magic that holds it all together. And obviously delegate and scale and all of that, but just have that personality built into the business, because that's a unique element that's very difficult for the competitor to sort of nick, and this is where that emotional value sits. But obviously if somebody is building a startup with the view for it to be sold quickly, then there's a value in moving that founder away from the brand entity as such, and building in as much personality in the brand itself, and sort of separating the two. And it's almost easier done in B2C businesses than in B2B, because in B2B it's often that the founders of B2B businesses are the businesses, very much so, right? But in D2C it's well, arguably easier because it's much more about the product, and so separating the two might be a strategic point in order to build value in the business, rather than keep it attached to the founder.
Makes sense. I suppose the other kind of question around that is your scaling there is the team and the culture, and also in-house versus agency support.
Yeah.
Where do you kind of see that working? Also, be really interesting from that kind of retention and community angle. What's the kind of skill set that's required as they kind of scale up, and where is it the best balance between in-house and agency support?
It's sort of well, as in any question in marketing can be answered in one way. It depends.
Yeah.
It depends. I guess I would always come back to the key skill set of of the core team. So if we have our core founding team of the startup, then they know things that they do best, and their ability to manage in-house teams in their specialty areas is much higher. And if that retention falls into somebody's expertise, then they'll be able to make a judgment. And obviously, you know, if this startup is growing super quickly, it's much easier to use an agency, because that scalability of skill set and expertise is just smooth, and you don't have to think about managing teams and scaling them and all that. But also, if you feel like this is something that you want to build in-house for whatever reason, you know, building an in-house team would be recommended. But I believe there's always a need for mix of both. I think it's great to have external agency partners, consultancy partners to support those in-house teams, for them to have that support of you know, knowledge and expertise, and just somebody to bounce ideas off sometimes, in order to be ahead of everyone else, really. So yeah.
Makes sense. Well, look, thank you so much. It's been great to have the chat. How I normally kind of end these conversations is, if I can ask you, how do you distill everything down to one main point that you could make a recommendation from a startup going to a scale-up phase?
Well, obviously I'm, you know, biased towards everything retention, but I would say that for any startup moving into that scale up phase, think about that audience, community, or database of customers that you have, and think about retaining not only those customers, but think about those prospects and leads that you have there, and really put strategies in place to keep them engaged and happy for long, because the sales are just going to come flooding naturally. You're not going to have to try.
Makes sense. Well, thanks a lot, Mags. It's been great. Great to speak to you. And I'll see everyone again soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks. Bye.